Hello, my name is Alex Halavey. I am the exiting president of the Association of Internet Researchers. I've been your president for 2 years. I am very much looking forward to handing over the reins to both Lori and Jenny, and I have absolute certainty that they will continue to support the organization and grow it and do some great things with it. So I'm very happy that those two will be taking over. I've also been both privileged and honored and enjoyed the opportunity to serve as president over the last 2 years. Traditionally, I'd be talking to you in the AGM, but I go on a bit, and so this gives you more of a chance to talk during the general meeting at the conference, and it gives me a chance to blather on in a way where you can, fast forward or hit stop when you get bored. So I just wanted to kind of touch on some of the things that I had hoped to do over my 2 years and some of the things that I think that we as a group have accomplished during that time, and give you a bit of an update on the kind of state of the association. And so I'll do that as quickly as I can. Before, I have to say that I'm going to probably slip into I a lot in here, but if I do say I, it's never true. A lot of the things that we've accomplished over the last 2 years, have started with earlier executives. They got the ball rolling, and we just kind of caught it. And I can say with certainty that everything that did get accomplished over the last 2 years was because of a dedicated group on the executive. And we're lucky that a number of them, including Laura Kendall and Michael Zimmer and several others, are continuing on in some capacity. I will be continuing on, of course, as the past president on the executive for 2 years, and then I kind of more gradually fade into the Jedi ghosts of past presidents. I should say that every one of those past presidents has been a willing and eager volunteer to help us with a number of tasks. And so I am eternally grateful for having such a great group behind us to help me move the organization forward. And we are kind of a teenage organization. We're at 14 years, which is I don't have any 14-year-olds yet. But I've heard that it's a troubling year, and so and I think we are kind of in a troubling space in some ways, because we're both young and we're on the cusp of being an organization that might have a centennial at some point, and so it's hard to keep our foot in both of those. On the one hand, frankly, this year CPSR, which was, I think, a fairly influential organization and a great organization, closed its doors. And so, and it was a bit older than AIR was, quite a bit older actually, by about a decade, maybe even 2 decades, come to think of it. And so this reminds us that, it's a fragile thing, although I think we're a very dynamic organization, and I think that as an association we have a very strong culture. There is something here that needs to be preserved, and so it's important to preserve what we have and try to keep it not just alive, but also vibrant. And so that was a heavy weight, knowing that I would have some of that charge. To help that happen, one of the things that I really wanted to accomplish over the last couple of years has been to provide a stable platform for growth. And when I say growth, I don't necessarily mean growth in number of members or the size of the conference or anything like that. Although I do think those are, slow, careful, mindful growth is important. And I'll talk about that at the very end here. I mean growth in terms of our maturing as an organization. And to do that, I think we needed to provide a bit more of a stable base for what we were doing. So a bunch of things to help have that happen. One was a rationalization. I guess that's a good way to talk about it, since it's bureaucracy of the bylaws. Our bylaws had self-contradictory pieces, and they were confusing in many places, and they hadn't been updated for a number of years. And so we made some updates to better reflect what we were actually doing in some cases, and also just to remove some things that were complicated for no reason. One of the big changes there actually was to remove 2 unelected members of the executive. And I don't want to, because they were unelected, does not mean that they didn't do a lot of work. I was one of those unelected representatives for many years. Jeremy Hunsinger was one of the 2 technical people for a number of years, and I was as well. Holly Cruz managed our list for as long as I was on the executive as well. So almost a decade, or maybe a decade at this point. That's very much work behind the scenes. And if you see her at the conference, you should I don't think you should all buy her a drink because that might lead to a less productive conference for her, but you should buy her part of a drink or at least shake her hand or something like that, because her work has been quiet but very important to the organization. And she's continued on as an executive member, but this will be the end of her term as well. Because we felt that it was important for all of the members of the executive to be elected by the members, we kind of removed those slots. It was also difficult to find people to fill those. It is, as I said, a somewhat thankless job. And we'll talk a little bit about what happened with those tasks. A lot of the tasks that go to those people have either been moved to our new association coordinator, or they have we've professionalized it and outsourced it. So a lot of what we've done is kind of taken a lot of the technical stuff, and rather than rolling our own and building custom solutions that seem to be replaced every year and never quite work, we've decided to spend a very small amount of money on inexpensive external solutions that are externally managed, so that we have some stability over time, and they can be charged with keeping them updated and keeping them in place. So one of those that you've probably interacted with is Wild Apricot. I've actually gotten that right. I seem to want to call it Wild Orchid or Wild Kumquat or something. I can never come up with the apricot, but it is Wild Apricot. I have it in notes right here, which is our membership system. It's an inexpensive membership system, but I think you'll find that it continues to support our members well. We've managed to usually have members that come in and out, and really are associated with purchasing the ticket to the conference. We're hoping that people will be more continuous members, and we're looking for ways to encourage that moving forward. But also, we just needed a membership system that was stable and stayed in one place. We seem to have a new membership system every year, and none of them quite did what we wanted to do. Of course, it's off the rack, so it doesn't do exactly what we want it to do, but that's the trade-off for having something that works, and that works for members as well as for the executive. And so I think that was a good move. We've also continued to use CompTool, I think over the last 3 years, after using OCS for a couple of years that didn't really work out well for us. CompTool has worked well for us, I think. Again, it's not perfect. I find it more clunky than some of the other people do, but it seems to work for what we need. And so, again, a small expense for having something that's stable and having something that's predictable for each year. We moved to online voting, which was very inexpensive and did away with a very clunky and a system that was very clunky and very prone to failure in the past. And so that is, I think, a great advantage, and I suspect that Lori will continue to use the same system for the next election in 2 years to make that stable. So what we have is a bunch of little pieces on the kind of systems side that help to provide predictability, that remove a lot of the uncertainty and everyday kinds of hassles. That doesn't mean they're all gone, but I think it's a big step in that direction. Another one, and probably the biggest change, was hiring our first part-time employee. We actually are paying someone, Kelly Boudreau, who many of you have probably interacted with as the association coordinator. She takes on some of the work that was done by Holly with the list. She takes on a lot of the kind of day-to-day interactions. If you've emailed one of our email lists, you've probably interacted with Kelly in one way or another, and hopefully you'll see her at the conference as well. Again, this is something that started many years ago, and Mia Consalvo and I had a lot of discussions about how this might happen, and so we finally moved forward with someone who was, has subject matter expertise. She has her PhD in our area, and provides some stability and support for the organization that we desperately needed. From the outset, we wanted this not to be a cost hole for us. In other words, we really wanted it to save us money, and I think that that has happened. We paid kind of on an ad hoc basis. We've often paid for people who were conference organizers or in some way assisted that process, and now a lot of that has gone to Kelly. And the advantage, of course, is that Kelly gets to stay around and provide some kind of institutional memory and expertise from past conferences that she can then apply going forward. And so we have a bit more stability, and I think you've seen that in some of the conference planning. We've been in the black for last year. Again, this has to do very little with me and a lot to do with Michael Zimmer, who's our treasurer, and with Lori Kendall, who's kind of helped to work with the conferences, very much so. I shouldn't say kind of, has taken on a large portion of that work, and our locals, who've done a phenomenal job of not just planning great conferences, but also managing to do it within a budget. I think, I'm fingers crossed, that we are close to or making our budget this year, which will mean that we're 2 years in the black, which is good after some difficulty in previous years. And so that's great. And I think some of that is some fairly heavy work by those people, but also some of it is routinizing and systematizing our process. We also are now, I think, announcing consistently 2 years in advance our locations. We are moving our calendar forward so that I think this is the first year, maybe even ever, that we've had the call for papers ready 1 year in advance and ready to go. And so for Bangkok next year. And so I think that we have some deadlines that Kelly will be able to track on in a way that some of us have had difficulty with, kind of in splitting time, but she's kind of managing the time process. And that's harder because we've also introduced some new things over the last 2 years, including, we've expanded the fee waiver to include a travel grant and expanded the number of people who are receiving that travel grant. We've introduced both the book award and the dissertation award. So there's more moving pieces now than there have been in the past, and I think we're getting a better handle on those, both of which I'm very happy about, and I think will help to serve the organization moving forward. There are some other things that I think we could do better with. I think by the time the conference is up, barring some miracle, we won't actually have transitioned all the papers from ConfTool to Spear. Oh, I'll mention that in a minute. We should have the papers up directly after the conference. They're still available via ConfTool if you're looking for a paper during the conference, but they won't be over to Spear, the public proceedings, until after the conference. And so that transition has proven to be a little bit more difficult than we expected it would be, and so there probably needs to be some work on that still. Our past papers from previous conferences have been supported in various ways in the past on different systems, never very well, and I know Kelly is working on that as well. And so hopefully sometime before the end of this calendar year, we'll have the papers up in a way that members can more easily access them. Right now it's very difficult to access them without some direct assistance. And even with some direct assistance, it's difficult. In part, these were organized in different ways in the past, and so it's been difficult to have a consistent system that hosts all of them, and we just need to kind of get that up and working. Another one of my goals was to internationalize the conference. I mean, we claim to be a global organization. Many presidents have raised that as one of our values, and yet we tend to go from Northern Europe to Northwestern United States, and Canada, and the Midwest in Canada and the U.S. And so we tend to kind of have a circuit that goes back and forth. We broke that with Brisbane, but we haven't really since. We've tended to go back and forth between those two. I am thrilled that we're going to Bangkok, and I am thankful to an executive who made the difficult decision to make that trip to Asia. I think it's going to be we have a great hotel. We kind of are putting the pieces in place. I think it's going to be an outstanding conference. I know it's a long haul for a lot of you who tend to be in North America or Europe. In both cases, it's a bit of a long haul, and maybe slightly less for those of you in Australia and New Zealand and the surrounding areas. But it's a long haul for everybody. But I think it's going to be an outstanding conference. I think the people involved have already shown that they are dedicated to making this a great conference, and I'm very much looking forward to it. And I'm glad that the executive made the decision to kind of move outside of our orbit. Doesn't mean that we aren't coming back to Europe and the United States. We have members here who we need to serve, but if we're a global organization and we're going to take that on, then we also need to show that by hosting our conferences outside of that North America, Northern Europe circuit. And I hope we'll continue to do that at least as much as we can moving forward as well. So also there was this hope to kind of increase our presence online and in different venues other than the conference. We got Spear produced. Sueli Fragoso helped to get that moving, and a group of developers in Brazil that she kind of hooked us up with actually did the design work on top of OJS, which is an open source journal hosting system. Which is great, and I think we need to. And Andrew Herman took over as editor for Spear over the last, 1 year, so I think that we'll need to do some thinking about what that means for the future. If it's a proceedings, it's still a little unclear how that's going to move forward, and I think it's an important kind of footprint in the online world. And as I said last year, I'd really like to see us citing more of the work that gets done at AIR. It tends to get done at AIR and then published elsewhere, but I'd like for people to know where a lot of this is getting some of its early feedback. And so I'd like to see AIR cited, and so that people know that it's here in some ways. And so I hope that Spear can help to make that happen a bit. AIR grad, our list for grad students has been moribund for the last several years, but we have a few volunteers who've stepped in and said they want to move it forward, as will the student reps on the exec, and that's great. AIRL itself is now above 4,500 members, which is of the list, which is pretty amazing. It's one of the largest lists on the web, it's not on the web. I do know the difference. It's on the internet. It's on the tubes somehow, and so I think I'm pretty happy about that. Our membership is not at 4,500, obviously, but I think it shows a certain amount of impact within our kind of various fields, and I think it continues to be a good resource for members of the Academy kind of around the world. There's also been some talk about getting the wiki back up in order, and I hope that will move forward. I'm looking forward to meeting with some people at the conference who are interested in making that happen. I know that there was some contention on how to make that happen, but that there are people interested in doing it means that there's a good possibility that it will happen. We need those volunteers to make all of this happen. I'll make a plea here very quickly. Well, let me start by saying that there was some contention around the conference itself, and I see that as a good thing. If there was no contention about how the conference should be organized or the kinds of themes and nature of presentations, it would mean that there weren't people with differing backgrounds and ideas who had a vested interest in the conference and in the organization. And so I think it's healthy that we have some difference of opinion or interest moving forward. I will say, let me just mention offhandedly that there was some idea that there was a desire to make the conference more exclusive, that is, to lower the acceptance rate. I don't think that any president or any program chair has single-mindedly wanted to decrease the acceptance rate. That certainly has not been my interest. It is quite simply an artifact of a large number of people wanting to come to the conference and a very slowly growing number of potential positions for presenting. Well, that was a mouthful at the conference. And so this year I think we have the largest number of people presenting of any AIR conference. That may be the case. It may be that Toronto was slightly bigger. I'm not sure. But I think we're at the largest ever. We're certainly larger than we have been for many years. And our acceptance rate has gone up, but only from previous years, but only slightly. Part of that is just that we have a lot more people gunning for a smaller number of positions. And so I think that it is important to grow not just the organization, but the conference as well. I really want to be mindful about maintaining the culture that we have. I just got back from 4S, and I liked a lot of the people presenting there and a lot of the presentations, but it's also the case that they had so many parallel sessions that you couldn't really see anything that you wanted to see. As long as we're on the topic, I also would really like to see us engaging in more innovative ways of presenting our work at the conference and interacting at the conference. Frankly, it's not worth my time to go and only see presentations. That's just not worth my time in terms of travel, in terms of money, in terms of lost time. I suspect a lot of people feel the same way. You could present on the video and do the same kind of thing that a lot of conferences now look like, especially a lot of large disciplinary conferences. And so, AIR has always been about the conversations around that for me, and I hope that we can make the program that way too. This year we have more panels and much more in terms of roundtables, fishbowls, really only roundtables and fishbowls. We didn't have a lot of experimental stuff being presented this year, but we have more of both of those, and I hope that will encourage more conversations, and I hope that future presidents and future program chairs can look for ways of innovating in this space and making academic conferences worth going to be honest. I'm cutting back on things I'm going to because a lot of them just are not worth the time. And I think AIR still is worth the time, and I think we need to look for ways of making sure we maintain that vibrancy. Again, I think we can also grow the conference in size very slowly and very carefully, making sure we maintain the culture that makes AIR worth going to right now, that makes the conference worth going to right now, and makes the organization worth being a part of. I like to see this contention. I do hope that we can continue to have people contributing to an idea about what the organization and the conference should look like. I want to encourage those discussions, not just in a reactive way, but also proactive. Now is the time to kind of start to think. Part of the disadvantage of planning 2 years in advance is that there is a kind of slow uptake to making changes, but there is an opportunity for that, and I think it's an important part of being an organization, and I hope people will continue to contribute to that conversation. And not just the conversation, but also volunteer to be a part of what we are doing. That is, AoIR has always been driven by volunteers. We do have our first paid employee, but she will probably also be our last paid employee. We're driven by people who are volunteering to make this a better organization. You can volunteer at your disciplinary organizations and have at it, but you can't really expect when you do that to have major effects on how the organization is run or to find ways of being innovative. And I think that one of the advantages to AoIR is that we are still young enough that when you volunteer, you're going to have a significant impact on what we're doing. So come to us. Don't just say, I'm willing to help, but say, here's something I want to do for the organization. What do you think? And I want to thank those who have been doing that over the last year, and I want to encourage others to do the same. Thank you again. It's been a privilege to be a part of the organization, not just as a president, but as part of the executive and as a member over the last several years. And I look forward to continuing to do that, perhaps in less of an intensive way, but certainly continuing to volunteer as I can. Thanks again, and I hope you're enjoying or have enjoyed or will enjoy the conference. Bye.